Hi everyone, it's Ben from Trekitt and we're back here again in the Iron Bothy, and we're going to go over some footwear in today's video, more specifically the outsoles. So if you've ever walked into an outdoor store, much like our Hereford one, which is out there somewhere behind these Bothy walls, you may have been overwhelmed by the selection of footwear that you see. You don't really know where to start. In store, we can obviously guide you through that process and we can run through a full fitting where we ask you what you're getting up to, where you're going, what terrain you want to cover, and any specifics you require about the footwear. But this video is a little bit more suited if you just want to learn a little bit more about it before you come and visit us, or if you can't visit us and you're shopping online, it should give you a little bit more of an idea about selecting different types of footwear for different terrains and what the outsole really means. So this is going to be a little bit of an explainer where we go through different styles of footwear, from trail runners, approach shoes, walking boots, trekking boots, mountain boots, that kind of thing, so that we can play around with them a little bit and show you the differences between them and what they might be expected to be used for. So with any footwear, a good place to start is looking at the outsole so that you can get an idea of what the footwear is going to do for you. Now it's worth pointing out that all of these footwear models that we've got here are just examples of models that we stock. We stock an entire range of different model sizes, both men's and women's. These are just examples we've got off the wall that are quite good for seeing the differences. These won't necessarily work for your feet, and that's where we really recommend coming in for a footwear fitting service if you can, or potentially getting in touch with our customer service team where you can then get a little bit more information based on width of your feet and end use, things like that. But we'll start with lugs, because the lug depth on any footwear, particularly on boots, is very important. So we've got something like the Aku Trekitt 3 wide here, and this guy is designed primarily as a general purpose trekking boot, hence the name Trekitt 3, inclusion of the name there. But with most trekking boots, walking boots in general, you will find that the lugs will be quite deep and they will be slightly wider in their spacing so that they can gain a little bit more traction across a wide variety of terrains, because you'll be using this kind of boot across multi-terrains, from everything really from dog walking right up to sort of mountain walking, maybe even a little bit of light scrambling use in a boot like this. But you need deeper lugs that will gain traction in very different conditions, from dry and dusty, hard packed surfaces, right the way through to slightly soggy, soft underfoot conditions. The lug spacing allows for a little bit more bite, a little bit more traction. This spacing also allows for a little bit more self-cleaning to go on with the boots, so it should shed some of that mud, dirt and detritus from the bottom of the sole unit quite easily, so that you don't lose traction, because as soon as the lugs get covered and filled in with mud and dirt, you're going to lose grip because you can't dig and bite into that surface as much. If we swap over to something like the Scarpa Terra as a different example here, I'll have them side by side, which hopefully we've got on the overview camera above us, which we'll swap to. The Terra's sole unit is a little bit less aggressive. You've got narrower spacing between the lugs, which suggests that the Terra might be useful a little bit more in sort of less arduous duties. So you'd be using this dog walking, you can still use it for hill walking. Both these boots are still capable in all conditions, but you might start to notice the limitations if you're using something like the Terra, other models out there that are less aggressive in their tread and lug depth. Again, jumping to something completely different, we have something like this guy, which is a Black Diamond Technician, which is an approach shoe sole. Now, approach shoes are, generally speaking, designed for approach into rock climbs, things like that. Generally, you want to use them in hard-packed conditions, either on rock or on dry, dusty surfaces. They don't work nearly as well in the wet and muddy. So I'm just going to drop the Terra out for a second. You should hopefully be able to see the difference in the soles here. So first and foremost, it's almost completely flat. So you've got a very, very flat profile on the bottom here, which means it's very grippy on rock, but the lugs, the lug depth on them is also not very deep, so it's not going to have much bite into wetter, looser surfaces. You've also got a climbing zone on the front, which we'll go into a little bit later. Apart from that, just so I'm getting that out of order, you also have trail running shoes. Now, trail running shoes will come in a few different varieties. Some of them will be a little bit more road to trail, depending on where you're based. You might be running from home, you've got to run on pavement to get to the trail. You don't want something super aggressive there because you're going to end up wearing that tread out very quickly. It's also a little bit more sort of summer appropriate for those harder packed trails where you don't need those aggressive lugs, because you're just going to wear out the shoes quicker and you don't really need it. However, it then won't perform quite as well in those different situations. So I've got a Sensoride 5 from Salomon here, and then I've got a Lycan from La Sportiva. These two are kind of at opposite ends of the trail running spectrum. Both of them are trail running shoes, and the lug depth is going to be slightly different on them depending on where you plan on using them. So the Sensoride is definitely a slightly more fair weather option. So the tread pattern on this is a little bit less aggressive overall, and the lugs aren't nearly as deep. It's also not going to be as good at shedding mud, whereas the Lycan has really wide spaces between all of its lugs here, much more aggressive, is much better suited to harsher off-road conditions, wet and muddy stuff. So you're really going to use this where you need to dig in for traction and think a little bit more like an off-road tyre versus a tyre that's designed more for on-road. You're going to struggle a little bit when the going gets really tough. But ultimately, again, you can use both of these in the same conditions. You might just notice that if you use this a little bit more in the summer, you'll wear out the sole a little bit quicker because of the prominent tread pattern on it. In roughly the same vein, you will often find that along with the lug depth and lug patterning, you should also pay attention to the heel or the heel break of a boot or shoe. Really good example of this is this boot that we've got from Slaver here, which is actually a rated, B2 rated mountaineering boot. But it's got a very aggressive, sharp ledge on the back here, which provides a lot of bite when you're descending, when you're going downhill, because you're digging your heel in a little bit more. It digs into the ground a little bit more and helps you be a little bit more steady and stable when descending. It also just aids overall in a little bit of traction because you've got another biting point. It's something as a point of difference, especially here, that you won't generally find on an approach shoe because it's not the sort of environment that you're going to use the approach shoe in. And approach shoes will usually be very flat. So by comparison here, it is a very flat, very different style of shoe to something with a mountain boot. You can also then, if we swap to a Terra, the Terra still has a heel break, so it's still going to be suitable for descending, still going to be useful in those environments, but it's just a little bit less aggressive, again, because they're not expecting you to be going down something quite so steep for so long. You do also benefit a little bit more from the Terra being a little bit more flexible, which again, we'll go into a little bit later when we talk about stiffness of footwear. Now, while I've just riffed on how different an approach shoe and a mountaineering boot are, they do also share some similarities, and this comes down to another feature that is quite unique to boots and shoes that are maybe designed around a little bit of climbing, whether that be climbing, scrambling, just something where you need a little bit more support around the edge of the toe. So both of these have a climbing zone around the toe, which is, generally speaking, quite a flat piece of rubber that allows you to stand on smaller edges and be a little bit more confident, a little bit more like you would in a climbing shoe. But if you don't need to get your stickies out, if you're not going for quite that much of an adventure, or you're on a bigger day where you want to wear something more comfortable, or in the case of a mountaineering boot, something more supportive that you may need to cramp on up later, you have this climbing zone here at the front so you can stand on smaller edges. Now, depending on your personal preference, your ability level, and generally just your desire to wear any footwear, you may notice some people out on the same route wearing very different choices of footwear. I was a very good example of this the other day when I was up in Scotland doing a bit of scrambling, a bit of climbing. My climbing partner that I was with was wearing a B2 rated mountaineering boot. I was wearing a set of, admittedly mids, so I had a little bit more ankle support, but a set of mid approach shoes. We both got up the route exactly the same, both had a good time of it. He was just in a slightly stiffer, heavier boot that he felt more confident in. I had something that was a little bit more flexible, but both of them, crucially, had that climbing zone, which made getting up what we were doing a little bit more fun. So this one might not be quite as appropriate for those of you buying online. You might just have to read our description as to the different compounds that you use for rubber on the bottom of the boots. We should have a reasonable descriptor of what they do. But if you are in store picking up boots and want a little bit more guidance, one thing that you can do is figure out how soft or hard the rubber compound is. And the easy way to do that is by taking your footwear of choice and either digging your nail in and seeing how much the rubber deforms or how easy it is to dig in, or just try pressing and moving around the lugs. So this Caracal from, no, is this the Caracal? No, this is the Lycan, sorry. Caracal's the other model they stock. This Lycan has really quite soft rubber. So soft rubber compounds are very grippy, which is very good, but they usually suffer in terms of durability. This also helps on a trail running shoe to have softer rubber on it because it can deform and move around objects a little bit more, because the terrain you're going to be covering, you're moving a little bit quicker, the shoe has to react a little bit differently. Versus something, go back over to mountaineering boot, that has a much stiffer compound that is designed for longer term durability, because number one, the conditions you're going to be using this in are going to be a lot harsher in general. There's going to be a lot more rock, potentially more ice with a mountaineering boot, and snow. Generally, the conditions are just going to be harsher, so you need a more durable rubber that is going to last longer, because you're going to be covering greater distances with more chance of abrasion, more rubbish, things like that to deal with. And then you have some that are sort of somewhere in between that are still fairly stiff, because this again is a trekking boot, but it's a little bit softer, you get a little bit more tackiness, a little bit more grip, and you start going down to things like approach shoes, which again will tend to use very sticky, tacky rubber, not quite as sticky and soft as you would find on, say, a climbing shoe, which is for all-out grip, but if you rub your thumb across it as well, you can feel the tackiness on your fingers. So these guys will use sticky rubber so that you get a little bit more grip on smoother surfaces, so on rock and things. So if you're smearing, standing on that climbing zone, things like that, you'll definitely benefit from that softer compound of rubber. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of a rundown into footwear outsoles and why you might choose something like this over something like this, or vice versa. If you have any specific questions in general, pop them in the comments down below, or if there's any videos that you would like us to produce in the future, please do give us your ideas and we'll do our best to give them a go, especially if it means we get to go outside and have a little bit more fun somewhere. All of these footwear models and everything else that we stock will be available through our website, so Harry will pop a link up somewhere now to shop our entire range of footwear. Alternatively, you can always come and visit us in our Hereford Service Centre, book a footwear fitting appointment, and we can go through all the rigmarole of sorting you out with hopefully the perfect pair of footwear for what it is you're doing. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. Yeah, we can do POV running shots with it in our mouths.